Hi, I'm Norman Perillo, a furniture designer maker at Perillo Design and a woodworking educator author at WoodSkills. I'd like to talk about woodworking jigs today. Woodworking jigs used to ensure repeatability and interchangeability of components working in small batches of furniture or general woodworking, and I'll get into that. So as you see in front of me, I've got a whole collection of woodworking jigs that I've developed in my furniture making and my earlier box making phase. And I'll start with how critical jigs can be in your own work. So jigs and fixtures can make repetitive woodworking tasks safer and easier. In other words, jigs introduce repeatability and minimize risk in your woodworking and furniture making. And this is why I've embraced to create woodworking jigs in my own work over the years, and I'll talk about the different jigs I've developed. So woodworking jigs ensure that your cuts are straight, holes are plumb, and parts are square. So jigs are worth the time it takes to make them because you can use them for several years afterwards. As an example, this is a miter spline jig that I developed in the 1990s. So it's, I would say, maybe close to 30 years old, and I can still use it today, although I've progressed to using hand tools for this type of thing. This was primarily used on a table saw. Just to give you an example, they're fairly rugged once you create them correctly and you spend the time to invest some time into creating them. So in industrial terms, the jig is a work holding device used to guide the motion of another tool, like a cutting tool or a drill bit. So jigs are heavily used in industry also, in metalworking industries, and for creating components for machine work. This has also migrated down to woodworking over the years, of course, or decades. So the main purpose of jigs is to increase interchangeability, to simplify your manufacturing process, and to assure high accuracy and repeatability in the mass production process. We can scale this down and replace the term mass production process to small batches in furniture making, and this is what I primarily use everything here for. Now, like I said, I'm a former box maker. If you've watched my earlier videos, and I talk about my box making business, and I've since progressed to furniture making, so you can see some of the jigs are adapted to box making, and then some are adapted to furniture making. So you develop jigs to speed the making of furniture components and to ensure they can be interchangeable. Excellent for small batches of furniture again. The best material for jigs is a veneer core plywood such as Baltic birch ply, and that's what I predominantly use in my jigs. I also use a lot of offcuts, and of course we all have offcuts in our work. So you can see an example of the combination of a small veneer core plywood with a piece of offcut. And this is a drilling guide that attaches or clamps to the side of a furniture piece. It's just one example. So using dimensionally stable materials ensures that the jig is accurate, is easy to use, and remains accurate throughout its life. I can attest to this. So in this case, I've got some MDF on this saddle jig, and this is essentially a drilling guide, but the MDF ensures that it's dimensionally stable throughout its life. It doesn't distort or warp. So template jigs are the most basic type of jigs and is used to machine a few simple parts for small batches. Template jigs are used as layout guides for locating holes and contours and are usually secured to the workpiece through the use of clamps. Most of these woodworking jigs are attached to a workpiece with clamps, of course. I'll go through a few of them, and I'll bring up some more information about each individual one. So jigs are most valuable in repeatability and interchangeability of furniture components, specifically with small batches. And I'll start with, again, this is a miter spline jig that I developed close to 30 years ago. It's used on a table saw, and the box would attach to it, and I'll show an example of that, and run through the blade. The kerf is a 1/8 inch, so it translates to 1/8 inch spline kerf. And I find that a little large, so I progressed to just using hand saws to create my spline, my kerfs since then. And again, in the vein of box making, I have a series of jigs I've developed close to 30 years ago, and these were used for, this one specifically was used for installing a quadrant hinge in a box, so it clamps to the side of a box on one corner and then use it they're used with routers, by the way. So early on in my woodworking career, I worked predominantly with routers and this type of jig, but I tend to do this with hand tools now. I moved away from routers in my work. Hardly ever use them anymore. Don't use them at all, actually. So this is again a template jig used to create a mortise for a quadrant hinge. Again, in the box making vein, this is another similar type jig, template jig, used to create an opening for this handle. I used this extensively in my box making. This was a handle for either a drawer or for the top lid. So this would create the opening, and I would just glue this in. So it's designed specifically for that. You'll find that the opening is much larger because that allows for the router bit. So it's something you need to take into account when you're developing your own jigs if you're using routers. So that these two go together. And this is another jig, template jig, again for box making, and this would create a small mortise, an opening for the hinges, for the lid attached to the body of the box, in my case a jewelry box. And this was specifically for one type of hinge that I use mostly. I standardized a lot of my hardware because I was actually box making extensively in those years, and I marketing my work nationally throughout the US and internationally, so I create them in batches of 18 to 20 boxes. So I had to standardize the hardware, and the jigs were invaluable in box making for me. Now here's another, again a template jig for the quadrant hinge, and this is for the opposing corner. Now you'll notice one is a left and one is a right. So this was it's a pair, and this would create two openings for quadrant hinges. So I wouldn't have to use the standard hinges and use. I've migrated to quadrant hinges. These are some other template jigs I have. This is a drilling guide that I use extensively in my current work. This is for creating a series of dowel holes in the sides of a top and bottom panel of a cabinet, and this would be installed on the side of a top and bottom panel and used as a drilling guide. So it's reversible, and I can flip it over and I can create the holes accurately, and then flip it over and create the matching holes in the side panels. So everything's reversible. And this is a stop, so this is actually an indexing stop to help align the drilling guide. Now these drilling guides are made of wood and they do wear out, so you eventually have to replace it. The holes just simply get larger. So I progressively moved to harder and harder woods in the actual guide itself, and I use maple now, so it lasts a little longer, but again they do wear out. And if you want high precision, you need to just keep replacing that every so often. There's a smaller, so this would be designed for a specific length or a depth of a cabinet. And there's another one for a shorter cabinet. This is, the depth would be shorter, so again they're all reversible. So this part indexes to the cabinet side, and then this part indexes to the cabinet top and bottom, and everything flips over. Even the screws are mortised in differently. Again, another version. So I kept considerable amount of versions of these, but again the holes do progressively get larger in diameter over time. They wear out. And this is another guide. This is a more complex one for a deeper cabinet. It does have a provision for an indexing pin. I just don't have it attached. Again, several more holes, and the holes closer to the ends are always closer to each other for strength. This is an example of this is a saddle jig, and used to bore large holes into furniture pieces. The criticality of this is that even if you do have a drill press, sometimes the furniture components are long or unwieldy, and you can't really attach them to a table on a drill press. Now I have a drill press. I don't have a floor-mounted drill press. I have it sitting on a pedestal. It's fairly large, but it's not the floor-mounted version, so I tend to have to use saddle jigs considerably because I only have maybe 2 or 3 feet of allowance for length of furniture components. These are some more saddle jigs, drilling guides. And this is actually a crude attempt at a pocket hole jig or something similar to a pocket hole. And I just found this actually. I used this in some small batches of furniture way back when. So the holes are drilled at certain angles and for a drill bit to go through. And this would clamp to the side of a component or a corner of a furniture piece. This is a template for a table leg, so I could, it actually sits on a table for a drill press, so I can drill holes accurately. So this would provide a stop, and this would provide the opening for the table leg, so I can fit it in. Once it's clamped, I can ensure that the holes are drilled perfectly. So I would, for small batches of furniture, I like to create the components together. So I would create the components in a few hours and then shift to a different set of components. And that's when these templates, jigs come in handy. So I think I've talked about all this. And this is a strange one here. I can't remember what I used it for. I usually identify them or mark them. Again, it's a drilling guide, but it was probably for a specific profile. And another example of, and I'll show you some more information on this as we go along. These are Kumiko jigs, and these are specifically to create the small components involved in a pattern or Kumiko motif. Again, the Kumiko jigs I just referred to, these are used in conjunction with a very wide chisel. This is a 1-inch chisel, 1 inch or maybe 1 1/4 inch. And this is a stop that slides, and it's got multiple holes, so I can increase or decrease the length of the component. And once you've set the components into this groove, you use the chisel to pare away. And what this does is it creates specific angles using Kumiko. Now, if you're familiar with Kumiko, you know what I'm talking about. But all the angles are either 67, 22, or 45. And these I need 2 jigs to create the angles, and it's fun to make this, and I enjoy creating Kumiko, but you actually do need these jigs to be able to pare away at that angle, and I typically use basswood, so it works really well when you're paring. It's another example of a specific woodworking jig used specifically for Kumiko. I'll put that aside. Now I have another jig I'd like to show. This is a Dovetail jig that I developed several years ago, maybe 20 years ago, and it's gone through some iterations along the way. This is one of the more recent models. I've got 2 of these, and my earlier ones were more crude attempts at this, but this is a more substantial, more rugged version that I've used for several years now. So it has knobs, and I would attach the components, the tailboard and the pin board, and I align them or actually chisel away and remove waste using the same jig. They're spring loaded, so it's easier to attach things, and I've got a little strip of sandpaper in the cawls to ensure that the pieces don't slide. So I'll give an example of how that works. This is a tailboard, and this would clamp in. So once you've used this a few times, it's very straightforward and easy to use. It just needs a little bit getting used to it. So if I clamp the tailboard in, I can actually use it to remove waste using a chisel and a small mallet from without having the tailboard on your actual workbench surface and damaging it. So it provides that extra layer, and it provides a form of alignment, so I don't go past the baseline of the tails. So that does that. Then I can actually, so if I back this off, I'm transferring, let me show this. Here's a good example. So if I'm transferring the tails, if you do tails first, by the way, which I do, mostly, I've never actually done it the other way. So if I've created the tails and I need to transfer it into a pin board, I would use this part of the Dovetail jig to clamp the pin board and then mark the outline with a marking knife, create an outline, and then pencil it in, and then saw away for the pins to match the tails. It's another factor, or another advantage to having this Dovetail jig. Now once I've done that, that specific task. You can remove this and work away again at the pins. So this would equate to a drawer front, and it's always thicker than the drawer side. So I need to. This is the advantage of having springs here. So then I would clamp this in, and then remove the waste from the pins. And again, because it's against this caul, it prevents me from going back too far back, or from the bottom or the baseline, and it creates that extra surface so I don't damage my workbench. So it's quite an interesting, and I do offer plans for this on my woodskills.com website. I'll put that now. Woodworking jigs, and you developed an understanding of how critical they can be to furniture making, especially if you're working in small batches, to introduce repeatability and interchangeability of components, and how critical it is if you want to ensure that all your furniture pieces are uniform across, so you can actually interchange parts and components. Sometimes clients demand a different wood, walnut, maple, so you can create the components both in maple and walnut and provide that to the client as an option. And these are the drilling guides for the cabinets, so that's a very good example because I use these extensively. I make mostly cabinets on stand now, so this is the technique or process I use. So I hope you've enjoyed this and adapt it to some of the furniture making woodworking I do. So please subscribe to my YouTube woodworking channel, where I share more of my woodworking techniques, my woodworking philosophy, my thoughts on woodworking, and all the challenges I've experienced, and I introduce some of the new forms of woodworking I've discovered. And also visit woodskills.com, where I have a good selection of my books, both in print and digital format, on woodworking, and all my online courses, and I also offer some woodworking plans. I have maintained a regular blog on what I've got going on in my workshop and in woodworking in general. So enjoy.